So Senator Warren has sent a letter to Greenidge, a Bitcoin mining company in upstate New York, asking for information regarding its carbon outputs. Greenidge was, of course, the story in a pretty interesting article a few months ago about how they have a Bitcoin mining operation next to a lake in upstate New York, and they were off-putting some of the excess heat into the local lake. And some commenters from the local area were saying that you could use the local lake now as a hot tub because of the energy output from the mine. Of course, that was a little hyperbolic and it made for a great headline, but that wasn't, of course, the truth. There was a little more heat going into the lake, which of course is notable and necessary to kind of understand the effects of that for the local environment. But it definitely turned heads, and it definitely turned Senator Warren's head, who has been an outspoken critic of Bitcoin mining over the last year or so. So Naomi, I want to throw this up to you. What is your take on this? To see a senator jumping into the Bitcoin mining fray a little bit even more, targeting an individual company. They are a public company. They're not a private firm, so I think that's notable. But asking for information from this public company on Bitcoin mining.
Well, I just wonder why anyone is even listening to Elizabeth Warren anymore. Like, who takes her seriously? This is literally the same woman who, like, a week ago said, wondering why your Thanksgiving groceries cost more this year? It's because of greedy corporations. Completely missing the point that the government, it has atrocious monetary policy that has created huge inflation, and that's where all the prices come from. Like, Paul Graham called her out and was like, this is like a 419 scam. It seems patently ridiculous to you because you're not the target audience. It's only meant for those dumb enough to believe it. I totally agree with that. So I tend to disregard anything Elizabeth Warren does. I also really want to push back against this narrative that we should be vilifying power consumption. We absolutely shouldn't. Like, the wonders of the modern world all come about because of power consumption. It is a beautiful thing. And let's not put it all into one blanket. Let's vilify pollution. That's a great thing to vilify, but power consumption is not. There are all kinds of different types of power consumption. And Will, maybe I'll throw it back to you for some stats here, because my understanding is that since mining moved primarily to North America, the amount of renewable energy used in mining went from like a tiny percentage. It's just like blown out of the water. So I don't understand why Warren is being like, power consumption is bad, therefore mining is bad. It's like, well, let's look at what power consumption actually is going on. Also, let's understand that power consumption, it's not this fungible asset. Some power can like, for example, with Bitcoin miners, they can really specifically target different modules. They can turn off power consumption in places like Texas. They could sell power back into the grid. Like, there's all kinds of interesting things that goes on with mining because you don't need to have the power really close to where all of the population is. You can find these places where power is just sitting unused, and you can focus your mining power there. It's not stuff that's being wasted. A lot of the time, it's not stuff that's creating a bunch of pollution. I just think that this narrative is out of hand, and we actually need to specifically focus what we're talking about. But Will, I'll throw it back to you for those stats.
Yeah, just for disclosure, I work for a Bitcoin mining company doing media for them. So take everything I say with some salt. And I do have salt on this topic specifically. I think you're right about Elizabeth Warren. She has some interesting perspectives that don't seem to be based in data. They seem to be based a lot in emotion and just kind of what her electorate would kind of want her to steer towards. Like the FUD we say around green energy and Bitcoin mining is a little disproportionate, especially since we've seen a lot of the Bitcoin miners coming over from China and moving into the US market. They're mostly based around renewables. About 11 to 20% of the US grid is based on renewable energy. Bitcoin mining is anywhere between 30 and 50%, depending on how you kind of calculate it. So it's leading the charge there. I do think on like a very general level, though, the question isn't really about Bitcoin mining or green energy. It's just about what is the value proposition for Bitcoin. And if you take Bitcoin as money and as sovereign money and as this decentralized currency that's going to be better for the future on multiple levels, then the conversation starts to steer a different direction. And I think people like Elizabeth Warren, incumbents in Washington, D.C., I think they really understand what's going on. They see that Bitcoin could topple the dollar as a reserve currency. And I think that they're just going to attack it from many different weak points. David, I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah, I think you hit on the real issue right at the end, which is that this is actually not ultimately about an energy or an environmental critique. They're choosing Bitcoin because they want to target it for other reasons. And you can just think about this in terms of the big energy picture, right? Like, think of energy as like a hose, and we put what we want in the hose, and then it goes out to all of these different destinations. And what Elizabeth Warren is doing is, instead of worrying about what's going into the hose on the input end, she's stomping on one of the little outputs at the output end. And you can choose any of those outputs to, like, if you decide you don't want somebody generating greenhouse gases. I mean, my point of comparison is always the cruise industry, which, by the way, they burn bunker fuel when they're in international waters, which is horrendous and heinous. And it's, a cruise is literally useless. So if you want to choose a target, you can choose a target and go after them on environmental grounds, because all of these things use energy, and some of them use much worse forms of energy than Bitcoin. I don't know if Zach wanted to weigh in before we move on.
I just wanted to, this debate will never end. Yeah, and cruises suck, by the way. So shout out to cruises sucking. But the thing I did want to say was I wanted to highlight a story that we did yesterday about Filecoin, which is a data storage network. They put out this like open source energy consumption dashboard that Bitcoin mining firms such as Greenidge could incorporate into their work to demonstrate, again, with some verifiable data, ways that we can maybe transcend this never-ending debate. So I'd encourage y'all to check that out. If you run a mining firm, go open source that dashboard and get some data to prove these arguments.